before we start proper, could you, Guillaume, briefly introduce yourself and very briefly just say a few words?
Yes, sure. Thank you, Carlos. So yeah, my name is Guillaume Ridou. I'm joining from Singapore, where I've been based for the last 3 years, and I'm in charge of business development for Southeast Asia and Japan regions for a product group of ABB called Energy Portfolio Management. And yeah, we provide advisory services and market analysis software for customers, including utilities, power producers, developers of renewable projects, financing institutions, and the likes, and also some portfolio planning software for market participants.
Great, thank you, Guillaume. And well, now, Andre, could you introduce yourself briefly as well?
Sure. Hi, my name is Andre Susanto. We're a consulting company who's been doing work in the renewable energy in Southeast Asia. We're based in Indonesia. We do consultancy and technical assistance for design, for engineering, procurement, even construction management, but we also do regulatory, we also do financial analysis, due diligence. Basically, a lot of our clients are either private sector, financial institutions, or the government. They usually come to us first, and then they go hire the PwC and EY, to kind of get the finalized bankable products. But we provide a lot of the local knowledge and a lot of the foot on the ground kind of insights.
Great, thank you, Andre. So without further ado, if you can share your screen, Andre, and then we'll start with your presentation. So for those of you who joined a little bit later, so yes, you're in the right place. So the webinar on solar opportunities in the Philippines by Athens Site's Relearn program. And today we'll start with Andre Santos' presentation. So Andre, over to you. I think you need to unmute your microphone, but we can see your screen.
Okay, so just trying to find the unmute button there. So we'll, today I'm just going to focus a bit more on the microgrids. You can kind of ignore that it's Indonesia, but basically what, a lot of the microgrid stories that we have here is very much applicable in the Philippines. Kind of just to kind of go back, a lot of our work in the rural community is really to help them along and empower them. That's kind of our social entrepreneurship. We take a lot of our consulting revenues and bring it back and put it back into the company to specifically help the rural community. So we have a bit of social entrepreneurship in there. Innovation is really the biggest key today, either in technology, financial, engineering, and really in business model. How do you get a project that is appropriate for the clients and as well as financially viable? And this includes for microgrids. The biggest thing is that technology is not a barrier. I'm an engineer as a background, and I'm finding that the engineering work of it, the real detailed engineering work of microgrids, it's taken on a smaller percentage of importance. Not that it's any less important, but other things such as how to finance it, such as a sustainable business model where the community continue paying and continue need electricity, that's getting a much larger share in importance as well. So just kind of quickly go through this. I mean, this is a typical mini grid, right? You've got lots of individual mini grids, kind of one village, the next village, etc. This is kind of what what we're looking at when we look at rural communities. But there's also lots of ways of connecting them together. That now if you have excess energy in one village, you can kind of go to you can sell it to the next one, you can share it with the other, etc. But here's the important part, are they going to be a mini grid forever? Or are they going to be eventually connected to the grid? That's also an option. Even better, and this next topology is something that works really well in the urban mini grids as well, which is you connect to the grid, but you're able to say, I don't want to connect to the grid. It's up to me, the mini grid owner or operator, whether I want to connect to the grid or not. So all of these are available today. I mean, this is technology, not new. It's not difficult. It's really just kind of give you a background on all of these things are possible, and therefore this has to be part of the business model and the financing. How do you finance it? How do you get revenue from a mini grid? Now, just really quick, I'm not going to explain this in very much detail, but basically what I've built recently is a modular topology microgrid, which does all of the things that I've just explained, but on top of that, it's also modular in generation and in storage, so that when you want to add just a little bit of generation at a time, the topology allows that to happen. And this is important in villages when you have a new school or a new clinic. The cool thing about it is, if you see on the left there, that's a solar panel and the inverter on the pole. That's how we get it to be a lot more modular. Now, this works with a centralized solar PV, but you can also add the panels on top of the poles like that. And the storage is, you're seeing the one of the storage hubs there. And in the village, this is how you how you deploy it, right? You need the poles anyway, and we're just adding the panels on top of the poles. Not all poles have panels, and then that's how you get the modularity in the future. So just kind of keep that in mind. But here's the one thing that people are forgetting, and we won't talk about this today, is the urban mini grid and microgrid. How do you get hospitals, universities, jails is important. What happens if a jail gets a blackout and they don't have their own microgrid, and all the doors open up because there's no electricity? So that's one of an issue, but we won't talk about that. Today we will mostly focus on the microgrids. So really, what is the key for success in designing and defining a microgrid in rural areas? The first thing is that there's no way we can strive for perfection, but we have to look into how do we get the right solution there. It may not be perfect, but it is the correct one. And it's based on reality. It's based on how do people use it. So really quickly, here's the 4 myths or the 4 things that people are always saying microgrids are difficult to manage because, is it high quality? Do you have enough power and energy? Is it reliable? Is it cost effective compared to diesel, for example? And absolutely, we have to look at this, if more power, do we need more power? It depends, if you install it, exactly what's needed, then you probably will need more. But if we look at the next slide, and I've got another one, this is a study done by NDEV. These are for the microgrids that was paid by the Indonesian government. For this particular site, there's a 62%, almost 63% energy curtailment. There's plenty of energy and power left for productive use of energy, for other things that are value adding, that are using electricity, not just consumptive. Then here's another case study, a 65% energy curtailment. And these stories kind of continue. When you have a grant, when you have subsidy, when the government is paying for it, or a grant fund is paying for a microgrid, why not aim for a much larger system that you're including productive use of energy, you're including value-added activities that will get the community to be dependent on electricity, and they would want to continue using it. Reliability, again, the case study I have is specifically for Indonesia, but this applies in lots of different places in the Philippines, Fiji, and other Pacific islands that I've looked at as well. Surprisingly, a high number of them are working. The number that I'm showing next, 82% of the government installed projects in Indonesia are still working today. And that's quite a high percentage, and that goes against what the common beliefs are. And even better is that there's a huge PV is solar PV and MHEV is micro hydropower. That out of 116 respondents, 87% of them know how to get funding when they need it for repair. 11% doesn't for PV. And that's a surprisingly high number for people in rural areas to know who to ask for additional funding when they need repair activities done. So what about quality? How good are these systems? Maybe 15, 20 years ago, lots of microgrids are available that are not very good. But these days, a lot of the systems I'm seeing, again, in the Fiji, Myanmar, Indonesia, Philippines, they're really good ones, right? I mean, they're SMA or Schneider. Sorry, Graham, I haven't seen a lot of off-grid ABB yet. But you guys don't have it's not quite out there yet. So what about cost effectiveness? Well, this is kind of where it's a little bit tricky. If you look at this chart, and these are numbers from the grant build mini grids, right? Again, in Indonesia, I don't have the numbers that I can actually justify for the Philippines yet, but this is quite representative in my research. If you look at on the very far right, which is cost per household, it's quite high for these grant ones. There's lots of reasons for it, but it is something that we need to consider. Now, in contrast to this, the government built mini grids in Indonesia, which go to very, very difficult places, and they've built about 1,000 of them. It's on average is about $8, and it is a full mini grid with distribution, cables, poles, meters at every house, everything else. So don't think of $8 per watt as expensive, because it is if you only consider the generation, but this includes everything else. And in Indonesia, PLN, which is a utility company, they would spend $10,000 per household just to connect it. So that's kind of quite expensive. And this, again, it also applies in the Philippines, where lots of them are quite unreachable because of this. So what makes a lot of these sites successful, right? Is it advanced technology? No, they're mostly using lead acid, typical AC coupled or DC coupled inverters. It's nothing new, really. It's just a regular off-grid solar PV systems. Professional O&M, no, most of them are operated by the community. Very seldom there's a professional company operating it. There's a few, of course, but not a lot yet. What about advanced robotics or something? We haven't seen a lot of this on the field. So, and just a bit of a background related to that, my team and I have visited roughly 700 microgrids across Southeast Asia. So we've seen quite a lot of this, and I haven't seen a single advanced robotics for cleaning in rural areas. Productive use of energy, though, that is quite a good case for success. When there is productive use, value-added use in there, people definitely want to use it a lot more. Although this does not account for productive use. That's it's actually not very good for the panels. It is good for the stuff that they're drying. It gets very hot and it dries very quickly. So what is the success factor here? And really, I can tell you that, you know, it's people. Really, it's the people that are finding the right story and how to engage with them and how to serve their needs. You know, ensuring that communities are involved and engaged through the selection process. You know, it really is getting the right people and getting the right business model and the right approach for the people is the key factor. And the process for that is that you gotta write the right proposal, right? What kind of, you know, how do you identify the need at each village, at each community, and then making the right proposal for them so that it is a good project. And then you evaluate it, administrative, technical, you know, you kind of, you know, pitch it to different people. Is this the right proposal? And then you make the final selection. This is the right village. This is how I want to do it. And then you do the procurement. And then the cool thing is the last thing is the handover. It's not a hazard. It's you hand over not just from the contractors or the project owner, but can you involve the community? Can they be part owners? Can they be a whole owner at the end of the period? You know, 5 years, 10 years, 15 years. And then of course you'll get to operate it and manage it the right way. Now, again, just going back to people, finding the right stories, finding the right the way to do it. And just a quick story is that one of the villages that we're helping, we identified that they're actually making money, a small amount of money from smoked fish, no electricity there. And we've come there, we know the people are very diligent, they want to grow, they want to develop. So we are currently helping them write a proposal for electricity, clean water, and smoked fish packaging so that they can actually package it professionally and sell it to the big cities at a much higher profit than what they're using today. You know, and that's really, again, technology is not a big issue, but we gotta work with the people and find the right mix of how to fund it, how to do the right project, not just installing electricity, and then think that we're done with it. So with that, I'm done. I'll hand it back over to Carlos.
Thank you very much, Andre. Interesting use of memes here in your presentation. So we already have a couple of questions from the audience, and I'd like to remind the audience to post more questions. You know, this is your chance to ask our two experts. You know, all of these questions you've always had about the PV market in the Philippines. And Guillaume, if you get yourself ready, you know, to share your screen, and then it will be over to you. So also a reminder to the audience that you will get your presentations and a recording of the webinar on your email in a couple of days' time. But you know, even so, remember that, you know, this is your chance to ask questions. So stay with us and pose your questions on the Q&A box. So over to you, Guillaume.
Thank you. Okay, so yeah, first I'll bounce back on a comment made by Andre during his presentation regarding ABB and microgrid. So ABB does offer some microgrid solutions, and we are starting to get some success in Southeast Asia and Asia in general. We got some projects in Indonesia and Japan. But ABB is a big organization, and that's not really in my scope. So today I'm going to focus on the Philippine electricity market more from a wholesale perspective, and also looking at the transmission conditions and how does this plays for solar. So yeah, so ABB provides some market reports, some country market reports, and advisory services for studies like asset valuations. What the questions we get from our customers are for Asia are what are the most attractive markets to invest in solar and to focus on. What's the value of a solar asset in a specific country over the lifetime of the asset, and can solar allow consumers to hedge against the volatility of electricity prices increase and tariff, especially when prices are quite volatile and they are high transmission charges. So yeah, so we help our clients to analyze these opportunities as part of the first step in finding out where to focus their research, and then we still go along with them when they need to seek financing for specific project by evaluating the asset in order to request funding, the certain level of fundings, and also negotiate PPA agreements, PPAs. So today I'll present a bit of research we have done on the Philippines, and discuss some scenarios that we think are relevant to understand what's the risk and opportunity for solar in the Philippines. So first, a disclaimer, just a standard. We are trying to report as accurately as possible the information we find on the markets, but it's the responsibility of the audience to use this information. So when we look at the markets globally and we look at the current trends, we see like typical drivers occurring in the market. So first, in every countries, there are drivers for environmental policies. Climate change is sensibilizing customers to greener energy and CO2 emission reduction. So policies are supporting these investments. And first option to apply these policies is to look at CO2 emission reduction. So putting penalties on CO2 emissions, and that typically has impact of reducing penalizing coal generation, because they will emit more and will be more penalized. And as a result of the decrease in coal generation, there is still a need for base load that needs to be addressed. And what we see is that alternative cleaner generation needs to be brought online, and typically it's going to be more efficient and cleaner technologies such as gas, or like combined cycle gas turbines or combined heat and power, which are more efficient. And that has the impact of driving the gas prices higher. If fundamental applies and where there is more demand for gas, this will drive the price up. A second application of the environmental policies is to encourage the investment in renewables, and this creates a higher penetration of intermittent generation, such as solar or wind. And so the impact of this is that one is that there is a higher need for balancing technologies, for balancing the volatility of solar and wind. So these balancing technologies can be battery storage or demand response or any other new fast ramping technology, such as also gas turbines. And then there is this effect on the demand. So there are three factors impacting the demand. First, if the gas prices increase, then consumer may pay electricity at a higher price, which will incentivize them to reduce their consumption. There is this push for renewables, which may also encourage people to buy their own renewable generation on site. And from the point of view of the grid, this reduces the demand. And then there are the demand response program and energy and efficiency programs that will also encourage create some demand reduction. And then the last point is also to be added is for the environmental policies is the EV penetration, and that's also a driver, in this case an increase in electricity consumption. And then for all that, there are also investment in T&D and adjustments in the market, the wholesale market rules to enable all these new services to be and these new developments in the markets to work. So given these changes, what the question we get is, how do I understand these changes, and how do I develop new strategies and business models to build a sustainable business given the evolution of the power markets? So that's sort of the global trend. So if we now look at what's happening in the Philippines, so the same scheme is used. And if we observe, so we look at policies and regulations, there is a strong drive in the Philippines for renewables and reducing the impact of climate change. Philippines is quite exposed to the climate change with the typhoons, with the islands and some beautiful islands to protect. Plus sea level water rise. I mean, they are sensible to that, so they will try to apply some policies. On the CO2 side, there is intention to create a coal tax at around 150 pesos per ton from 2020. There is on the gas side, there's been some development. There is a LNG terminal being built. There's been some higher performances of a natural gas asset in the market this year. So natural gas is also developing. On the renewables, there are plans to implement renewable portfolio standard, the RPS acronym that you see. There are numbers that vary between 25% by 2030 and 35%. There are some changes to the grid codes, with battery storage being classified as a ancillary services provider, and there's been some use of new peakers such as gas turbines and also some oil plants to be providing peaking reserve and peaking and regulation services. And on the demand side, mostly it's still growing because Philippines economy is still growing at a high rate. So the demand will continue to grow, and there is also some electrification to complete. So this is still growing. But in the developed area, such as Manila, the demand is starting to be more stable. Then we have some small projects at the moment, such as the jeepneys, which are the public transport in Manila, and intention to turn them into electric vehicles in Manila to reduce the pollution. That is also, well, this is difficult, and that's not really going to happen too soon, but there are intentions there. And then on the market side and T&D, there's a lot of changes to the wholesale market in the Philippines. changes such as the change from a 1-hour market to a 5-minute market to enable better profitability for the fast ramping technologies such as storage or gas. And then there are plans to increase interconnections between the island to enable better integration of renewables. So in order to understand what drivers, what are the key drivers for the Philippines, and understand how these changes will actually affect the opportunity for solar, it's important to look a bit more closely at all the fundamentals for solar. And the first one is a look at the capacity evolution and the capacity adequacy in the Philippines. So the regulator, so ERC is the regulator in the Philippines, I was providing some guidelines. So for a long time, there's been a target to have 30% of coal and natural gas and renewable, and 10% from oil. And now there's no more target, and there's only guidelines, and these are 70% baseload, 20% mid-merit capacity, and 10% peaking. And currently there is an oversupply of baseload, because currently the baseload is at 80%, and there is 20% peaking, and the mid-merit is not really represented. So if we look at the chart on the right, it shows the demand in black, the peak demand, and then we see the total capacity in the stack chart, and we see the capacity share by technology type. So we see that renewables have been growing and growing, especially until the end of the feed-in tariffs. And then, well, it's actually continued to grow after the feed-in tariff, and I'll explain a bit more why did this happen. And then after 2020, there is potentially a carbon tax, so we expect that yeah, there will be maybe a plateau for coal generation. What we see on this graph, though, is that there is an increase in the capacity, the reserve margin, and it's important to understand how this will affect the spot prices. Usually oversupply can create a dip in the spot price, and that can be negative for solar projects. So the second aspect to look at the drivers for renewable is to look at the grid integration and the competition between the technologies. So for the grid integration point of view, first of all, for solar in the Philippines, everywhere is a good site for deploying solar. The irradiance is pretty good all over the country. However, the challenge is more on the land availability, and therefore the utility scale project cannot be very large. And so far, on average, it's a bit smaller than in other countries. We see here the projects on the right. So advantage of solar against wind is that solar is quite spread out, and project can be in all regions. So we see that the large projects are in Luzon, which is the island in the north, and then Visayas also has some very large projects, and Visayas are the group of islands in the center. And there are also some projects developing in the south, in Mindanao. From the wind point of view, most projects are in the north of the island, where the wind is most consistent. And elsewhere in the Philippines, it's a bit more difficult to deploy wind farms. So solar has an advantage over wind. From the grid integration point of view, currently there is a congestion on the the VSIAS link, and there is opportunity to deploy more solar in the VSIAS region. However, there has to be more grid capacity to allow the generation from solar to flow toward the load centers, especially toward the Luzon region and the Cebu city, which is the main load center in Visayas. So these needs are being addressed, and there are some large grid expansion projects, such as the connection on Negros and Cebu Negros Panay, which will be done by 2020, and there is a large interconnection project between Mindanao and Visayas. So this will create more opportunities for developing solar in the Visayas region, and will also reduce the risk of curtailment. Another aspect is the flexible capacity in this region. So far, there was no regulating reserve in the Visayas area, and all the regulation was provided by the generators in Luzon. And that means that some capacity had to be reserved on the interconnection between Luzon and Visayas to enable the regulation to pass. And now there are plans for next year to bring a new regulating reserve in the Visayas area so that more interconnection can be used for energy, and then the regulation will be made inside the Visayas areas. So that's for grid integration. And now moving on, looking at the competition between the sources of renewables. So on the left, we see the capacity between different types of renewables, and the capacity that were awarded for the feed-in tariff scheme that ended in 2017. And we see that the largest amount of feed-in tariff was captured by hydro, and then the second was solar and then wind. So hydro is definitely a competitor. However, in Philippines, the availability of hydro sites is getting depleted. So there are less and less sites to build new hydro. So that will put solar in the first position to address the renewable targets. And then the other aspect is to look at the load profile, and we see that solar is actually adequate to serve the midday peak in the Philippines. Like most tropical countries will have a high midday peak because of the cooling requirements in residential and commercial buildings. Therefore, this need needs to be addressed, and solar has the right profile to cover that need. That will also alleviate a problem that occurs a lot in some countries, which is the duck curve, and creates a high increase in demand at the end in the evening peak. So yeah, these factors are also positive for solar. And then the other aspect I want to talk about is the market environment for the Philippines. There has been a feed-in tariff program that has been very successful, and that was completed very quickly. All the capacity has been allocated, but it was stopped. And mostly feed-in tariff schemes are to trigger the investment, trigger the market for renewables, and they are usually costly for government, so they cannot last forever. But in that case, it was successful. It did impact the WSM price a little bit, but yeah, now it's finished. And actually, during that scheme, the concept was that to get the scheme awarded, projects had to be as close as possible from completion, and some projects had to start construction even before getting the awarded feed-in tariff. So not all projects got actually a feed-in tariff, and some got completed and are now without the feed-in tariff contract and looking for PPA. And while looking, they are bidding in the West End market. So they actually have a merchant business model and the risk, the exposure to the West End price. So it will be quite interesting to see if this project managed to be profitable given the West End prices in the future. Currently, it's also a common model that solar projects have this merchant risk in other countries as well. So on the right, we can see the ratio between the PPA feed-in tariff contracted projects and the West End projects right now. So that means that for renewables right now, for solar in particular, to put more capacity in the Philippines, there is a need to understand the West End price and to understand the risk exposure to that West End price. So West End being the wholesale electricity spot market in the Philippines. Okay, and then there is an important factor for renewable, which is the fuel supply. So in order for renewables to define the level of capacity tariff required to make to complete the project, they need to understand what will be the revenues from the WESM and what will be the gap to cover the missing money between the revenue from the WESM and the investment in the project. And the revenue for the WESM is mainly driven by fuel prices and which technology is setting up the price. So looking at the fuel supply, and the fuel prices is a good indicator for assessing the success of renewables. So in the Philippines, we can see on the right that the price is still being highly driven by the price of oil. So the WTI is the West Texas index, and they we can see that the West End price in red, the average annual West End price is following the trend of the WTI, and that's mostly because coal is being imported from Indonesia. And the supply of natural gas is from domestic resources, mostly the Malampaya basin, and the natural gas is indexed also based on oil prices. That's the current methodology to price these commodities right now. As infrastructure develops in the Philippines, it's most likely that natural gas will be driven by global market and the supply demand of natural gas globally, and will start being less linked to the oil prices. And so also the important point in this slide is to say that the Philippines is quite exposed to the commodity markets, and volatility in the price of these commodities will be a driver for the regulation in the Philippines. So currently coal prices has been more stable than natural gas prices. So regulators have been keeping a high proportion of coal in order to hedge against this volatility. But as natural gas developed, price will likely stabilize, and therefore there will be more. The regulator will be more amenable to increase the proportion of natural gas in the fuel mix. All right, and then last point I wanted to cover to finish the analysis of the Philippine situation is the cost of technology. We see well, for the solar case, the price of solar panels has already decreased significantly and is now reducing more slowly. And for battery packs, in this case, we're still going to see a steep decrease until it also plateau after a period of time when it gets closer to the price of the commodities to build batteries. So these changes in prices will also make the solar and battery more competitive against other resources and should drive more opportunities in the Philippines. All right, so from these factors, so these drivers that we've gone through now, we think there are two scenarios for the Philippines that can represent a spectrum of risk and opportunity for solar. On the left, there is a high coal scenario, which is more pessimistic for solar because there will be less opportunity to add solar capacity. And on the right, we have this high renewable scenario, which will be the optimistic case and which will lead to higher revenue opportunity for solar projects. So on the high coal, we have a continued growth in demand. The 4.3% is the growth indicated by the Department of Energy. And then there is little coal retirement. So in that high coal scenario, the government would favor to keep the existing capacity to continue to supply the growing demand, and will not take the risk to bring in replacing technologies to replace the old coal. Capacity mix would remain would go according to guidelines of ERs of the regulator, and then LNG infrastructure would develop more slowly, which means there would be less natural gas in the fuel mix. Renewable target would be on the lower end at 25%. Coal tax would be as well assumed as indicated by the regulator, by the government. And then on the economics, we would assume a reduction in PV costs to be slower in this case to represent a more pessimistic aspect of the market. And on the right side, we'll have the high renewables. So in that case, more policies to reduce the impact of climate change. So maybe more demand reduction programs, and so we would lower the demand growth to represent these policies. Coal retirement would be more encouraged, so we could see coal retirement at the earlier stage because more coal tax would be put in place and coal would be less economic. The capacity mix would be based on economics, and therefore they would leave opportunities for solar and natural gas to enter. And then LNG infrastructure will be developing faster. So in that case, the wholesale electricity prices would be set by gas, and the renewable energy credits, which are the capacity payment for renewables would be set by gas. So there would be a need to analyze what will be the price of this renewable credit based on the wholesale price set by gas. For the renewable target, we would have a 35% renewable portfolio standard, which is higher than the other scenario, and coal tax would assume to increase after 2020. And then on the economics, we would see some higher development, some reduction in cost of PV, so it would become more economic against coal. So and then also development of new technologies such as floating solar, which could be a good opportunity in the Philippines if it's coupled with the hydro reservoir, for example. So yeah, this high renewable would be the optimistic scenario. And so what we want to show is that we can draw this scenario, and then for investors to understand the risk and opportunity, they need to produce projections based on these scenarios to understand the best case and the worst case. And for that, so that's ABB provides a set of software and a methodology to address the projections. So what we recommend to do is to build the market models that take into account the demand, all the generating units, ancillary services requirements as a key factor for since when renewable are increasing, the fuel supply and fuel prices, the transmission topology, the penetration of renewables, and to run this model over 20 plus years. Usually we run around 25-year period, and now we see investors who want to run this model for even longer, up to 60 years, because their projects can recover cost over a longer period. And so, yeah, we would run model using simulation software that would produce projections of the electricity price, and gives all the necessary outcome to study what would be the opportunity and the best opportunity and the worst case scenario for a project in the Philippines. So yeah, I'll conclude on that. So takeaway of this is that, yeah, Philippine economy is growing, and there is a potential onset, and there are environmental policies to create opportunities. The market environment is liberalized, so it facilitates the access to market, but there is also some exposure to the global economic environment. So this needs to be understood. Market is also becoming more complex. And so for participation, investors and market participants need to invest in more sophisticated tools, analysis, and methodologies. And we think analyzing the risk and opportunity is a key requirement to understand when and when to invest and trade. So yeah, that would be it. I'll leave you on this slide with my contact details and a set of the type of studies that can be done using the ABB software and advisory services.
Thank you, Guillaume, for your presentation. We have a number of questions here, and we'll have time to answer a few of them. So let's start from the top. So what's Sanket Deshmukh asks, how is the Philippines structured in terms of policy? What are the drivers shifting to solar PV, specifically from the government's point of view? So perhaps, Andrew, do you have an opinion on this, or Guillaume, whoever wants to go first?
I'll let Guillaume go first.
So right now, the Philippines is in a phase of transition. The feed-in tariff have been stopped, and the next phase of regulations are are the renewable portfolio standards, the green energy options. There's been also the implementation of net metering for large customers. So they are putting the policies in place. So there is definitely a will, and the challenges right now are more on the readiness of the grid and of the market to integrate these the renewables and the intermittent renewables. I would say, yeah, this is going to come. The challenge is they wanted to implement a 5-minute market, and this is underway, but it's taking longer than expected. So yeah, there is definitely a push. Also in the Philippines, you have multiple options to go to market. You can go to the WSM and you will have priority dispatch and take the WSM price, or you can go and contract with a distribution utility, and the main one being Meralco, which capture most of the load in the Philippines right now. And they have implemented a competitive selection process and got some projects in the pipeline. However, they are sort of waiting on some finalization from the regulator to assign these projects, because they might be the regulator wants to make some changes to the CSP process. So that's
Thank you, Guillaume. Andrew, would you like to add anything?
Yeah, just one thing that everybody's forgetting in all the different markets that I've been doing consulting in, that at some point, unless there is proper management of the grid and the power generation that is available, coal, hydro, gas, etc., there's going to be a limit where the grid is really, it cannot be managed economically anymore, or even technically. There's not enough spinning reserve. There's just too much variable renewable and not enough cheap base load, because it's because of the way it's being managed. So just be aware of that right now, a lot of grids, a lot of markets are hitting that limit. Even Australia is hitting that limit. Manila is hitting that limit, I believe, with Meralco in some cases, some days. So just be aware of that. It's not that it is a risk that we all have to take and look into.
That's a very good point, and I'd like to close the webinar with the last question, actually, and which I think is a very relevant one. Someone asked that I noticed the awarded versus completed projects gap, which epitomizes the Philippine market. What is your take on this, or maybe you have an explanation for this gap? So, in other words, why have there been so relatively few of the projects are having awarded finally got built? What are the challenges you're facing? Who wants to go first?
I can provide some insight on this. Well, there's been one project, for example, in the project of Concepcion, which had got awarded some capacity through the CSP, and is now being delayed due to some review of the CSP by Meralco, and some decision to be made on whether they let other other participant to rebid, and then the regulator is also again has this intention to revise the rule. I would say another aspect will be this the issues that we're seeing now in the Visayas region with the lack of inertia in that region. There are large farms with no regulating reserve. If a cloud is coming, the system, which is approximately 1 gigawatt capacity, you've large farms of up to 1.3, 130 megawatt. If the capacity of that farm drops, it creates a 1% deviation in frequency and put the system in emergency. So there is a big challenge of managing the frequency of the network. With more flexibility coming online, this will be addressed, and then also these projects for transmission will allow will allow the production to go toward the load centers.
Okay, thank you, Guillaume.
Yeah, I'm just kind of really quick, just a couple of stories that I kind of been hearing from some of the developers in the Philippines is that looking at some of the financing, a lot of them, when they were building, they were able to get construction financing, but not necessarily the project financing, and that could be, I don't know how many of those are preventing the systems or the projects to actually continue forward. But at least for a couple of projects that I've talked to, that was the issue.
Okay, so financing, obtaining financing was difficult. So they hadn't been able to close financing. So, without financing, there is no project. Right. That's the same as many other markets. I am seeing that there are a lot of questions here, but I'm afraid that we have run out of time. So we'll have to bring the webinar to an end now. You will get to everyone in the audience, so you will get the presentations sent through, and through there you'll get the contact details of our speakers, so you can follow up with your questions then. So I'd just like to thank everyone in the audience for being here and for supporting us. I hope you've learned something today that you didn't know before, and that it's been worthwhile for you spending an hour of your day here with us. And we'll have many other webinars, so check our website, apainsights.com, where you can find all of the other webinars we have scheduled, including one next week, which is on how to save on your energy bills for large buildings, so energy efficiency for large buildings. But in any case, thank you everyone. Thank you, Guillaume and Andre, for your presentations. Any parting words before closing the webinar?
Oh, I'm good. It's all good.
Okay.
It'll get done.
Great. Well, thank you for being with us. And Guillaume, any parting words?
No, same. That's good message from Andre.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. And finally, I'd like to thank our sponsor for the Relearn program, Sterling & Wilson, who makes it possible for us to have these webinars, free, to have attendance free of charge. So, check our website at insights.com for more webinars like this. and keep an eye on our email. So in the next day or two, you will getting an email. You'll be getting an email from us with the presentations and recordings. Thank you very much, everyone, and have a good day.